This week on Arizona Illustrated, Arizona Veterans, a reflection.
He says, look who's behind you, next to you, in front of you. Look around, he says, some of you are not coming back.
Finding freedom after prison.
I can't blame anybody or anything for the decisions that I made. I made those choices. I had to live with them.
Fostering hope.
I was scared. I was a kid. I didn't know what was going to happen to me.
Welcome to Arizona Illustrated. I'm Tom McNamara. Earlier this fall, you may have seen the blockbuster PBS special series Vietnam, produced by Ken Burns and Lynn Novick. To accompany that landmark viewing event, Arizona Public Media produced a companion documentary series, Arizona and the Vietnam War. This week, as we honor the men and women who have served in our nation's armed forces and look to Veterans Day, we bring you this story about Arizona veterans who proudly served in the Vietnam War.
I was born and raised here in Douglas, Arizona.
Nogales, Arizona.
I was born in Agua Prieta, Sonora, Mexico.
At the beginning, it was simply another guerrilla attack and a brave stand by a few Americans and 350 Montagnard strikers.
Vietnam was almost nightly in the news.
All I heard is, there was people getting drafted from the neighborhood.
I was drafted. I got a letter from Uncle Sam saying, greetings, you have been inducted into the Armed Forces of the United States. I enlisted in April, maybe March of '67.
I had a pretty good idea I was going to end up in Vietnam. And so I decided I would enlist, go in the Marine Corps, where I could get the best training to survive Vietnam.
After I got my wings, I went to Luke and got my first assignment to F-100. So that was 6 months of training at Luke.
They had a big sign that they trained troops for Vietnam. And then the colonel, he says, look who's behind you, next to you, in front of you. Look around, he says. So we look around and says, some of you are not coming back. If you do come back, you come in the back.
I remember when I left for the war, I was really, really excited. And I turned around and looked at my wife, and she was crying. And I'm thinking to myself, my gosh, I'm going to be a fighter pilot in a real war, a war for men with hair on their chests. And there's missiles and MiGs, and our bases are rocketed, mortars at night, our bases are under attack. I mean, what's not to like about this? This is everything I've dreamed about.
There was no hesitation on my part. Helicopter pilots had a disproportionately higher number of casualties than other job descriptions in that period, but I was anxious and willing to serve.
As soon as you open up the doors, you can feel the heat, the humidity. I got there in March of '69, and you can just feel the humidity and the heat like that.
The Vietnamese, the Viet Cong and the NVA ruled the night. I mean, we had the technology for gunships and air support and medevacs and that, but that was their neighborhood, and they literally ruled the night. If we had an engagement during the day, it took hours, and it was usually hot and heavy, but we had very few engagements during the day. Most of it was at night.
You just bullets flying past you. And you duck and you're firing back and you try to protect yourself, to fire back, and there's so much going on. Explosion.
Being a corpsman was purely volunteer at that point, so our numbers were not great. Well, first of all, I wanted to see what kind of wound they had, and I mean, I've stuck my fingers and thumbs in holes to stop the bleeding. You know, some of the worst were amputation.
We would get soldiers still with their, weapons, with hand grenades, all kinds of weaponry. Sergeant-at-Arms had to go through and check the patient before they could start doing the triage.
The two patients on board, one has a gunshot wound in the leg, the other one has a gunshot wound in the back.
A Huey can hold 6 or 8 casualties. The most that we ever had come in on a Huey was 24 casualties, 3 of whom were hanging from the struts. The issue of those that die in your hands, you do your best as far as you can if you think there's salvageability, but there's a point at which it's too much and it overcomes you and you just have to go on to the next issue, but it hurts.
I was in Firebase Birmingham when an officer, I believe was a lieutenant, came to me and he says, specialist stop? Yeah, I said, yes. You're not a U.S. citizen? I said, I'm not a U.S. citizen. He said, you're not supposed to be here.
27th of July, 1965, first time the surface-to-air missile site was attacked. We had 28 aircraft on the attack. We lost 6 of them.
I got a lieutenant, or an officer, he come up and said that I had a few days left. I said my goodbyes, my hugs, and my tears, and my adios.
When I came back, it was a whole new level, like coming back to another world. A whole different kind of music. Everything changed, like turning a page. So I just had to cope with it.
It really never struck me until coming back. I was trying to find the gate that I was going out of, and there were protesters in the airport, and I was spat on. So after that, I went into the ladies' room, and I took my bars off, and I took my cover off, and I just looked like I had a black coat on.
Hey, we're the best America had to offer. It's just they didn't stand behind us. And if I could have changed anything, it would have been that.
I don't feel that we need to ever have troops in combat unless we have the full support, trust, and confidence of the American people that provide them the tools and the understanding that we're there to win. Because losing doesn't feel good.
I would say it certainly impacted me forever. And every day I do something to serve Uncle Sam. And I'm proud to do it. And that's in memory of the guys who didn't make it.
To watch more stories about and from veterans in our community, and to find out more about the Arizona Public Media documentary, Arizona and the Vietnam War, go to our website, azpm.org/Vietnam. The prison system in America is overcrowded and overburdened, calling into question the future of prisons and inmates. One thing, though, is certain: most people who commit a felony and serve their time will return to their communities, raising the stakes for everyone. But what happens next depends a great deal on how they're received by society itself.
One of the questions that I used to ask my interviewers, for jobs is, are you the same person you were 20 years ago? Have you grown? Have you changed? Why isn't it possible that that could happen for me too? And they would agree with me, but it still didn't get me the job.
Tucson native Manny Mejias was released from prison in 2008 when he completed a 20-year sentence for second-degree murder. When he was 15 years old in the 1980s, Mejias helped two other teenagers rob a fellow high school student who was killed by one of the older teens during that crime.
I was high, I was drunk, and I was very angry. I had gotten in an argument with my parents earlier, and so I left the house with the intentions of, forgetting about it, getting high, getting drunk, and, releasing some anger.
Police caught Mejias and the other suspects, and all three were sentenced to prison. While there, Mejias began a metamorphosis. He took advantage of educational opportunities, became a Christian, and reflected on his actions.
Then I realized, I can't blame anybody or anything for the decisions that I made. I made those choices, and I had to live with them.
And that's been reinforced in the mainstream society. While technically a free man now, Mejias discovered he would carry the past like the clothing on his body.
We're called ex-cons, we're called ex-felons, and one of the things that I tell people all the time is just because you put an X in front of that word, it doesn't make it disappear, right? So the term that we use is system involved. I'm a system involved person.
System-involved people often face barriers when it comes to voting, for educational financial aid, or when looking for a place to live, as Mejias and his wife found out due to his record.
When we were trying to look for a place to stay, every time we were asked to fill out an application for a rental property, there was always the question in there, has anybody in your family been convicted of a felony? After paying so many application fees and getting denied, we stopped going through realtors. We started looking for the signs on the stop signs that would say, 4-bedroom, for rent, call this phone number, or looking on Craigslist for a friend of a friend who just had a property that was trying to rent out. So we ended up in a lot of not so nice houses. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I promised myself before I even got out was that I'd never go back to the neighborhood. I'd never go back to the place that, my stomping grounds that formed my opinions of things. And that's exactly where we ended up living, because that's the only place we could find a rental.
There are also barriers when looking for jobs.
Every time that question was asked, have you been convicted of a felony, I had check mark the box and it wouldn't be called back. I literally had my resume passed back to me, and somebody saying, we don't hire felons. And so I had to do my best. I had to recycle cans. I had to follow the brush and bulky around and try to find, good garbage that I could turn around and sell at the swap meet. I had to take any side job that I could find. I flipped burgers, I've scrubbed toilets. I did anything and everything I could possibly do to stay legit and stay free.
It's like we hamstring people. And then blame them when they fail.
Grace Gomez works at the Arizona office of the American Friends Service Committee. The Quaker nonprofit organization fights against the expansion of private prisons and advocates for prisoners' rights.
They're living lives that are on a totally different track than everyone else. They're quasi-citizens, right? Not able to access the rights and goods of every other citizen. We've set up this structure such that people are never done doing time.
And it's affecting millions of people around the country. According to government figures, more than 600,000 ex-offenders are released from prison every year in the United States. At most, nearly 70% will return to prison within 3 years. However, activists believe these numbers can be reduced.
The probation fees in the judge's mind are expenses that probation spent.
This free workshop in Pima County is an example. It's a rights restoration project for people with federal and Arizona convictions who have already completed their sentences. It's hosted by different groups, including those that may be able to assist with employment.
If you're convicted of a domestic violence offense, whether a felony or a misdemeanor, you lose your gun rights under federal law.
Attorney Andy Silverman has been doing prison work through the University of Arizona Law School since 1970.
It's probably a little better today than maybe it was a few years ago, because people are starting to realize, first of all, how many people are in that situation. I mean, just in Arizona alone, we have over 40,000 people in prison, and most of those people will be getting released from prison. And it's not just people who have recent criminal convictions that face these problems. I get calls from people who have convictions 20 and 30 years ago who say, you know, I can't get a job.
Manny Mejias is one of the lucky ones.
Those lead to different things. Well, you drank a beer, well, then smoke the joint. You know, well, you smoke the joint, we'll do this line. It never stops.
He made a video about his story, from rock bottom to the positive changes he's accomplished, and the word began to spread. Someone saw the story, was impressed by his progress, and believed in him. She helped him find a job at a nonprofit organization.
Remember I told you about Society Standard? You're new, right? It's your first time? All right.
As the re-entry coordinator for the Pima Prevention Partnership, Mejias works with inmates who are close to getting out or are back in the community.
Then all the reality of freedom is going to hit us, right? The good and the bad. Then the stink of prison is going to start disappearing from our nostrils.
Prepare for the outside world and its rules, he says. Stay positive and do all you can to avoid repeating your mistakes.
I think it's really good. I didn't even know about it until someone called my name up there and asked me, told me I qualified for this class, and I didn't know what it was about and stuff, and I feel like it's a blessing that I could really change my life.
To hear his story, you know, and be able to come out and achieve what he's achieved, you know, in the little bit of time that he's been out, I mean, it's a blessing. So I think that helps out a lot. And, you know, there is a future. You know, this is not the end, basically.
Mejias says he couldn't have done it without societal assistance, his faith, and the love and support from his wife, who married him in 2004, 4 years before he was released from prison. But life continues to be a struggle, he admits. Thanks to health care benefits from his job, Mejias is getting counseling for PTSD from his prison years.
It's very, very hard to have to get up in the morning sometimes and know, you know, okay, people are going to be looking down on me. People are going to be, you know, turning their backs on me. I'm going to hear no a lot, you know, even though I'm not making bad decisions anymore. It's not just get out of prison and start life all over. And that takes a toll on you, you know. Living in a free world with a tainted prison mentality, that's a lot to bear every day. And I have to stay on top of it. Again, freedom management. I have to manage my freedom.
Next week, we follow up this story on the challenges formerly incarcerated people face as they re-enter society, with a candid and personal story about life on the outside after more than a decade in prison. Last week, we introduced you to 7 young people who bravely and candidly shared their experiences coping with mental illness in the Arizona Public Media original documentary, Not Broken. This week, we follow up with a story about the rate of trauma and mental health challenges young people encounter in the foster care system. The statistics will surprise you.
We were a very close-knit, do-or-die family. Like, if somebody messes with one of us, they got to mess with all of us. You know, we would get into fights every now and again, but, you know, in the end, we would come out stronger for it.
So my grandmother was someone who, she didn't have proper guidance as to how to raise children. And my mother then repeated that in her life with her 4 children. She did the best that she could with the knowledge that she had, but unfortunately she didn't have anything to guide her.
I would come to school with a black eye or a busted nose, and the teachers naturally would ask questions. They'd be like, you know, who did this to you? And at first I was very hesitant to respond because I didn't want to get my mom in trouble. You know, I thought it was, I did something wrong and I deserved it.
From the time I was probably between 5 and 8 years old, I mean, there was at least one time in a year where we were sleeping in a car or a hotel. I've witnessed my mom on drugs, and she was very, very aggressive and abusive towards us.
But after a while, they're like, no, this is wrong. This is not what they're supposed to be doing to you. So I eventually started opening up, and my siblings started opening up, which led to investigations being opened against my family. I was taken away by the cops. Everyone else was broken up by CPS. They went to various places, have ended up in various places.
So my first family that I was placed with was white or Caucasian, and that was a big difference. Their day-to-day routine was completely different from mine. We didn't sit at the table to eat dinner at my birth mother's home, but when I got into foster care, that was a norm for them, and it was hard for me to sit at a table with strangers and eat dinner.
The only feeling I can remember is fear. I was scared. I was a kid. You know, I didn't know what was going to happen to me.
I didn't have a support system. I didn't have stability. I had no direction. I was still dealing with a lot of hurt and pain, and I still was kind of impacted by the trauma that I was exposed to that I didn't get services for.
Being removed from your home is generally precipitated by some form of abuse. Primarily is neglect, but obviously many of them are also abused sexually, physically, emotionally. Domestic violence, there might be homelessness, their families might be struggling with substance use. So all these factors we already know have a very negative impact on the mental health of children that can last a lifetime. Majority of children do not get ongoing behavioral health treatment, even though, certainly from my perspective, the need is there just by virtue of having been removed from the home. That is a traumatic experience in and of itself.
And they would prescribe you these medications that would make you drooling, like a drooling zombie. Like all I would do there was just like walk back and forth. I was oblivious to all of my surroundings around me. And when I wasn't, I was very angry, I was very violent because I wasn't able to deal with those feelings. The feelings that were killed with the medication. You know, if I wasn't on that medication, I could have gone to some of the groups and dealt with the difficult feelings I had.
Pediatricians who prescribe the medication and child psychiatrists who prescribe these medications are often put in very difficult situations. And that's because parents or caregivers may be coming to them saying, this child is getting ready to be thrown out of the third school that he's been in, and it's really important for him to be put on something. We need something quick, and Ritalin's not enough. Or a very caring child welfare worker may come to the doctor and say, Doctor, we're in trouble. This is the best foster placement that this child could ever get. And the foster mom is really patient, but she cannot go another day if we can't figure out a way to control her behavior. Please help. And that doctor is then in a situation where they have a 15-minute med check, perhaps allotted for this time, and the resources in the community may be inadequate to actually refer out for additional help. And so they end up using these medications to fill a gap, and it's a problem that we just have to get a hold of and stop.
I got involved with the Center for Child and Family Health as a youth voice, and they began to expose me to what trauma really was. That was an eye-opener for me, because I had a word for what I was going through. I used to get down on myself because I kept making mistakes and I wasn't on the right path, and I was doing things, you know, that weren't always the best choices, and I was angry and upset and I was hurting people, but because I was hurt and I was going through so much and I didn't have a way to process it. I didn't have a way to talk about it. And so when I share that with the foster parents and the caregivers and they're able to see me on this end, it gives them hope. I work with foster and adoptive parents who are caring for children who experience trauma, and we provide them with trauma-informed practice skills that they can use in their home. And that, to me, has been the biggest part of my healing process as well, is that now I know caregivers are getting this information.
My primary focus right now is just to help as many people as I can. I fill out job applications, I'm currently looking for employment, have been for years. I would much prefer to be in a place where I can help people.
Children that end up aging out of the system generally have had an experience of not being wanted. At least that might be their interpretation of the situation. So they very often struggle with self-esteem, they struggle with depression. Their experience is that people who come into your life don't tend to stay in your life. And so it is difficult for them to then form healthy relationships as adults. Their role models have not been there.
Who I am is based on my past, my present, and my future. The fact that you're still here today and you're able to survive shows that you have a resilient factor in you that will allow you to overcome the obstacles that you have faced, but you can't do it alone.
I'm a firm believer that there are things out there, people out there, that would change my life for the better. I just haven't found them yet, or they haven't found me, and I fully intend to look for them. If I can end up with a family that I never hurt, that I never abused, but still loves me and that I still love, then I've done something right. I've done something that is, the opposite of what people did to me.
You can learn more about the 7 young people who shared their lives in the Arizona Public Media documentary, Not Broken, by visiting our website at azpm.org/notbroken. Thank you for joining us here on Arizona Illustrated. Next week, second chances for some.
Hey, life is moving at 100 miles an hour and you're used to going 5. It's gonna be okay.
What comes after?
The sound of a bathroom stall closing is a trigger. Certain smells are triggers.
Folklorico.
To me, it's part of myself.
And an ode to Tumamoc Hill. I'm Tom McNamara. See you then.